trying to get my bangs to look good. I cannot. That's what happens when you're stuck in quarantine for too long. You need bangs trimmed. It is what it is. All right, let's get started. Haha. Hi friends, this is Caitlin. We're going to talk about some books today. We are outside. It is a beautiful day. It's a beautiful day to be socially distant. My home office has been taken over and I can't be in there to film this video. The Hewitt Public Library is still closed for right now, but again, we are doing everything we can to become open to you guys and so we could see y'all again, because miss your faces. Not even kidding. We miss you guys like crazy. I miss you guys like crazy. I need to see some humans, okay? So today's theme is going to be fantasy. All right, so we're going to talk about some fantasy books today. I'm very excited about it. I want to talk about the difference between high fantasy and low fantasy. Maybe with the different kind of understanding the different kind of fantasies that's there, it may help you find something that you might like to read that is fantasy. Fantasy is a broad concept. It involves anything potentially magic or supernatural. Sci-fi and fantasy are two slightly different things. I would consider sci-fi to definitely be more about science, like asking the questions like, what if science gets involved? Or what if we can do this with science? Fantasy is more what happens if this is magic, or if I have this supernatural ability, or if this person can talk to animals. It has a very broad range of what can be done. So high fantasy and low fantasy are two different categories. For a lot of it, it describes the setting. High fantasy takes place in its own world. There's a whole languages, there's different peoples a lot, and it just is completely different. Aragon is an example of high fantasy. Different world, Valaglacia, different languages, things like that. Low fantasy, not a worse fantasy. Does not mean that. Basically what low fantasy is it takes place in our time, in our place, but kind of in this pocket reality. Harry Potter, I would argue, is low fantasy because it still takes place in modern day Britain. Percy Jackson takes place in modern day America, even though there's pockets of Greek gods and goddesses. I would argue those to be low fantasy. Now, I want to talk to you about two different books today. One is high fantasy and one is low fantasy. We're going to start with the low fantasy first because it is the newest. Today's low fantasy book is called The Babysitter's Coven by Kate Williams. It came out end of last year. I want to say November. Actually, it may have come out October before that. Babysitter's Coven is about a teenage girl. Her name is Esme. Esme is not a very social person, but she is a devoted babysitter. She and her best friend kind of run this babysitters club. Yes, they talk about that. Esme notices that strange things are starting to happen around her that she doesn't necessarily have control of. And a new girl moves into school. Her name is Cassandra, who has noticed what's been happening with Esme. And Cassandra also has these situations too, but slightly different. Esme and Cassandra are both people with these supernatural abilities, and they have this ability to do more magic, and they're supposed to help protect the world. It's very similar to Buffy the Vampire Slayer, if you're a fan of that show, which I am. So that made me happy. It's very much if the Babysitters Club and Buffy the Vampire Slayer had a baby and wrote a really cool book. It is the first in a series. The second book is to come out this fall, but I think it's very entertaining. It's low fantasy because it takes place in a regular city in Kansas. The book explores what happens to Esme's friendships with people, how these abilities are affecting her at school and in her babysitting gigs and in other aspects of her life. So this is a really interesting setup story to what I hope is going to be a really good series. This is a decent book. It is available on Overdrive as an ebook, so feel free to read it. It is very good. My high fantasy book that I want to talk to you about today, it is not new. It has been around for quite some time, and it was read to me as a bedtime story when I was a child. My dad read this to me all the time. If you're not familiar with this story, let me introduce you to The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Classic. Very good. But I'm not saying classic as in scary, hard to read, because it's not. It's not that hard. Tolkien wrote this book for kids. This is the intro to the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but this was written about 20 years before the Lord of the Rings was written. This is definitely high fantasy because it takes place in a land called Middle Earth, which is completely different from today's Earth, and there's tons of different creatures, different kinds of people that exist. There's elves, There's men, there's dwarves, there's orcs. J.R.R. Tolkien came up with the concept of orcs, by the way. And there's hobbits, which is what this book is about. Hobbits are little people. They're also called halflings. This is about a very particular hobbit named Bilbo Baggins. Bilbo Baggins is very fond of staying at home and enjoying peace and quiet life. And there is nothing wrong with that. But all of this changes when a wizard shows up on his doorstep and happens to also invite 13 dwarves to his doorstep too. Adventure ensues after that because Bilbo gets roped into a quest to help defeat an evil dragon on a lonely mountain and help the dwarves reclaim part of their home that was lost. It's a really cool story. You get to meet some great characters in there. I'm a huge fan of The Hobbit. This book is a treasure to me. It was read to me as a bedtime story from my dad, so I am very protective of this story and highly critical of the movies. We're not going to get into that though. But yeah, hopefully these two books will be something of interest to you. They are both available on Overdrive as ebooks. I'm hoping that you guys have stuff to do and things to read. I also hope that y'all are getting plenty of sunlight, like out here, getting plenty of water, because remember, y'all are houseplants with more complicated emotions. Water and sunlight. Make sure you have those two things in good quantities. I want y'all to be healthy and safe and good. You guys are precious to me. Precious, sorry. The Hobbit, if you read it, you'll understand. My preciouses. I hope that you guys are doing well. I would love to hear from you. Please let me know how you guys are doing. I miss your faces. We will be open as soon as we can. I love you guys. Y'all are perfect. I want to see you guys soon. I will talk to you guys later. Y'all have a great day.